Yeah. Hey, Carrie. Let's see.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for jumping on the call.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. I'm Carrie, Assistant Director of the Student Diversity and Inclusion Center. Good to virtually meet everyone.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
As I introduce you, I want to make sure that I'm pronouncing everyone's name right. So, Erica Minoshima.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. Kathleen Nguyen.
Yeah, you got that one.
Okay.
Spot
And
on.
then Han Kim.
Yeah, you got that. Yeah.
Woo! Awesome. Great. So everyone has a couple minutes before we get started. And then just for the question format, I am just going to follow the questions outlined on this Google document. Does that work?
Yeah,
Sure.
that sounds good.
Awesome. Oh, and Erica, how many more people are we expecting today?
I think we're expecting just 2 more. Jonathan and V, I believe. They both said they could join.
Yay! That is such a great turnout. Thank you so
Yeah.
much to everyone on this call. We're really excited to have you all here. Hi, Dan. Welcome on the call. And happy birthday.
Hi, Carrie. How are you?
Hi, Dan. Happy birthday.
Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh.
There you are. Sorry, it was my volume.
Oh, good. Hi, happy birthday, Dan.
Thank you.
Oh, happy birthday, Dan.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Han. I also see that we got some folks on the call. I'm wondering if maybe we're okay with sharing our screen so we can see each other and be people together. What do y'all think?
Sure.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Sounds good.
How do I get this?
Sorry, I'm eating.
Hey,
Oh, I love the background.
that wins. I thought the Star Trek background was the winner. I think you just took the cake.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
unfortunately, it's very appropriate.
Buddy.
So great.
Um,
Well, it's 2:00. I think we're waiting for maybe one more person to hop on the call. But in the meantime, I'll get some housekeeping stuff out of the way. This is our Confronting Anti-Asian Bias conversation. Thank you so much to the Asian American Pacific Islander Life Program at Westminster for helping us put this on, as well as Dr. Han Kim. Thank you for joining us. We will be recording today's conversation and then later posting it on the website in case, hello, in case anyone would like to watch it after the fact. So, Dan, should we get started, do you think, or wait a couple minutes?
Yeah, let's go ahead and get started, and then we can record this and put it up, and people can join us as they come. Does that work for people? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Good.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to thank the members of the Asian American Pacific Islander Life Program who we have here. Erica Minoshima, thank you.
Hi,
Kathleen
guys.
Nguyen, it looks like we also have on this call. And then, as I said, Dr. Han Kim in the Public Health Department at Westminster. Thank you all so much. Getting started with our first question, and then Jonathan as well, just hopped on from AAPI Life. Thank you all for being here.
And sorry, I also wanted our one guest, Heather. Thanks for being here with us. I'm glad you're joining us.
Yeah.
So all of this is for you. Just kidding.
VIP treatment. So members of the conversation that hopped on, can you speak a little to how often anti-Asian bias occurs in the United States as well as outside of it?
Yeah, so I did a little bit of research on this and I got some statistics, but I mean, anti-Asian bias has always occurred in like every country, every society, but it's been on the rise because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So from January 28th to February 24th, there were more than 1,000 cases reported to media outlets in the US. And then a group called Stop AAPI Hate was made in March, and they got more than 650 cases in the US reported to them. So those are just really big numbers. And I actually had no idea that it was like this amount of people reporting threats and such. But so Asians have been threatened and harassed, and even some of them who are victims, they just are reluctant to come forward and report what's happened to them. So keep in mind that these numbers might be less than we think. And then these incidents include being blamed for bringing the virus to America and also being told to go back to China. But it's probably more explicit things have been said as well. And there have been statements made from public officials that have called the virus a Chinese virus and also the Kung flu or Wu flu. So I think it's just unacceptable that government officials have decided to link the disease or the virus with a single country. Yeah, Asians have more than just threats. They've been like physically assaulted and spat on in public. And I actually saw an Instagram video of just like a compilation of a bunch of like pictures and videos of people getting physically assaulted and just like have cuts and bruises and stuff from this. So yeah, it's crazy. Oh,
Here, I think you're muted.
It was. Thank you so much, Erica. Anyone else want to add anything more to that question before we go on to the next?
I would just like to add, like, I have a few friends that are Asian, and they've also have experienced just like negative interactions from people. And they've said like people will see them wear a face mask and then they just like stare at them and give them weird looks. Or I can't remember if this was at the University of Utah or if it was a different school, but there had been a post of someone recording themselves covering their mouth and nose while they're walking past by an Asian person, which kind of put me, it just was uncomfortable to think about someone doing that. And I know the student teacher that his husband works, I don't know where he works, but a coworker was talking about the virus and was trying to avoid going to their lunch meeting at an Asian restaurant because of the virus, and they were trying to justify it, and the husband actually had to report them to HR because it was just discriminating and just being a little xenophobic.
Yeah.
There's some. Oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, like for me, I've actually personally faced this when I've gone downtown. Actually, I've been cursed out of City Creek before in late January wearing just normal street civilian clothes, and then like whenever I go out in public now, I'm cautious. Like I'm extreme conscious of what I'm wearing. So what I usually wear is what was previous issued to me from the military or my work clothes that is high visibility from the airport, as they would just say, "Hey, look, I'm like a working American." Like in their perspective, that's what I've personally experienced and how I've been sort of counteracting it. But it's not healthy though.
There's definitely pressures for Asian Americans to be more American. So there's always been that. There's also an interesting power dynamic here too, because the stats I've seen, there's several sites now that are collecting data, say for Asian American sites that are collecting data, and it seems like most of the acts of discrimination are against women and also seniors, which makes sense. I mean, again, it's a power dynamic, right? And so I personally have not been the victim of, and I'm pretty hypersensitive to these things, and I've been out, and I have not sensed anything. But at the same time, I know I'm male. I'm also, my English is excellent. So the pattern seemed to be those who are women, seniors, and those who are whose English skills aren't maybe as good as those of us who grew up here, seem to be more often the victims. Again, which makes sense given the perceived lack of power of these groups.
And I think that's the perceived component is an important part of this conversation, because it's actually it's a perception of difference, right? It's a being able then to look at someone and go through your, your racist schema to be able to say this person's checking off all these boxes for me, and so therefore I'm going to go ahead and target them, right? And so, which is, I think, to me, which points out to just like the xenophobic component of this, that it actually has nothing to do with the person. It has everything to do with the perceptions that an individual holds of a particular group or demographic, where they feel entitled to harass them, right? But I mean, I think that point of then the perception, again, race, gender, those pieces come into play into that.
Thank you, all of you. I agree, Erica. I think that it is unacceptable that our government is not only taking inaction, but is furthering a lot of these stereotypes.
Sorry, before we go, I just want to acknowledge that, Jonathan, I am so sorry that that's happening. And for anyone who's experiencing bias and discrimination at any moment, that is extremely shitty and terrible. So I'm sorry that happened to you, man.
I've faced worse than China. In China, actually, if you're of Chinese descent but you hold a U.S. passport, you can't go to a local school. And then if you go to an international school, we have different uniforms and all that stuff. Local students from local high schools, middle schools, and elementary schools will pick on you, spit on you on public transportation when they see you.
Well, I'm glad we had a competition of who does it worse, but they're all terrible.
Yeah.
So those behaviors are not okay in any setting.
Yeah.
There is actually evidence that this is happening in Asia too. So I know in South Korea, there's widespread bans on Chinese tourists. In Thailand, there's signs that says if you're a Chinese tourist, please do not enter their premises. Now, that's not to say to justify what's going on here, of course. The dynamics are very different, but Chinese discrimination against China is happening even within Asia. So something to keep in mind.
Thank you for that. This next question comes from our AAPI Life group. Why do you all think people accept misconceptions about Asians?
So there's many factors that take part into this, but some of them are like yellow peril, which I looked into, and it was just perceiving like Asians as a threat, just like a threat in multiple ways. So like we are perceived as working harder, and like we're fit into this, we just are sort of into the stereotype that we're always smart and that we will always like try to reach the top. But yeah, it serves a threat that we will like take over, I guess. And then there's also just the issue with like in the workplace or in even like school admissions, that we're just all the same. I read this article about Harvard admissions, and they were under fire about how they do their admissions, and some talked about how we're all just the same, and we like our applications are too, like they just don't give enough character, because what they perceive is that we're always just trying to be the top grade student, trying to do the best, and it just doesn't give, like we just have higher standards, and so they think it's not our character, even though like we are doing like extracurricular activities and all of that, or doing internships, and it's just making it harder for Asian Americans to even get into like Harvard. And then in the workplace, I also read about how employers steer away from employing Asians because they lack leadership skills and social skills, and because of that, it's not encouraged to hire them because it's taking away from the teamwork ideal in a workplace. And even if you are working in a workplace and you're Asian, it creates this glass ceiling, which we put down a bamboo ceiling, where we just can't advance any higher, regardless of like our high skills or anything. Um, but as of right now, the virus is really just the big factor that's taking part into the misconceptions about us. I mean, I think a lot of the reports are happening, but a lot of the reports are the people aren't even Chinese.
Yeah, I want to add a little more to the Harvard case. I also saw that, so affirmative action is just trying to help minority groups and women be able to get better positions. But for Harvard, they actually only allow like a 16 and 19% of Asians into their incoming class. And it's been like this stable number every single year, even though the Asian population has doubled in America. So they just they're more selective towards Asian Americans than like white people, I guess. Yeah, and I thought that was just very unfair. Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to add onto this because this is a really controversial subject within the Asian American community. Is this entire affirmative action issue? Because Asian Americans tend to be, if you look at all the demographics as far as wealth and achievement in schools, it tends to be higher. There's reasons for that, of course. It's nothing to do with the superiority of Asians. We tend to have, I mean, Asian Americans tend to be, it's more competitive for Asian Americans to get into the top schools, Berkeley's, the Stanfords, Harvard's, et cetera. But at the same time, this is also perpetuating the model minority myth. I think that's a question later on, maybe I won't get into it too much here, but I see this as a way, for example, the lawsuit against Harvard was not instigated by Asian American groups. It was instigated by a very much an anti-affirmative white group. It's a law firm that is a very conservative law firm that is actually spearheading this. So to me, I mean, yes, it is unfair that Asian Americans have more difficulty getting into some certain schools, but at the same time, this is being used very deliberately as an attempt to, as a wedge issue to kind of split the Asian American community from other peoples of color. So it's something that is really difficult to navigate, I think, as an Asian American, because yeah, I mean, we should be based on the merits, but you know, at the same time, we don't often see the fact that Harvard, if you look at, say, other forms of discrimination against peoples of colors, for example, legacy admits, athletic admits, those are also tools that are very much advantaged towards white population. We don't really talk about those issues. So I think it's something that we as a community have to be really, really wary of, that this is in some ways a cynical attempt to split off Asian American groups. In fact, the whole entire model minority myth is an attempt to kind of separate Asian Americans and use us as a wedge minority against other peoples of color. No, beyond that though, it's just, again, that's just my personal opinions about the Harvard case and this very, very controversial issue of race selective admissions in the Asian American community. But I also want to comment about Asian Americans in general. We've always been perceived as the perpetual outsiders. Part of that, is because physically we look different, of course. Our history in the U.S. Isn't well. I mean, it is significant. I mean, the first Asian American groups that settled in North America were Filipinos in Louisiana in the 1600s. Few people really know about that. But it isn't as the history of Asian Americans in the U.S. is completely. It's not taught in history. So we're perceived to be always the perpetual outsiders, that we are all always immigrants. It doesn't matter how many generations we've stayed here, we've all asked, oh, hey, your English is so great. Or, hey, where are you from? No, where are you really from? And those are, again, indications that we're always outsiders, regardless of how many generations our family have been here. So it's natural that as outsiders, when a pandemic like this occurs, we are instantly labeled as scapegoats. And if you look at scapegoating and diseases, this has happened throughout history. Groups are always scapegoated for diseases. Jews were rounded up and executed during the Black Plague. More recent history, Asian Americans, especially in San Francisco, were always seen as filthy or dirty. Of course, that was due mainly to poverty, but they're seen as some sort. It's part of the culture, and therefore, whenever there was an outbreak of plague or dysentery or cholera, immigrant groups are always blamed. Typically, Asian Americans, because Asian Americans, our culture's different, and it's strange to a lot of folks, and therefore, it's something that should be stigmatized.
Thank you, everyone. Dr. Kim, if you wanted to get into model minority myth right now, I think that would be helpful.
So the model minority myth is something, it's this idea that came about in the 70s that Asian Americans are much more successful. In fact, there's a really famous Time magazine cover saying that, Asian Americans are very successful. If you look at the demographics, as far as college education, wealth, etc., it seems like Asian Americans are doing well. That's the perception. We're smart. We're really succeeding. We're the ideal of, we're an example of the American dream. Immigrants coming here to work hard and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and be successful. It is, if you look at the demographics, some of the stats, if you look at them kind of at the surface, it seems to support that. However, it hides a lot of ugly truths. For example, the percentage of Asian Americans who live in poverty is actually one of the highest among all peoples of color. The vast difference between the wealthy and the poor is fairly dramatic in Asian Americans. There's a lot of Asian Americans who live in poverty, who are definitely have some serious structural disadvantages that the model minority really, really hides. Part of the problem, of course, is that Asian Americans are grouped together as this. We're talking about about 3.5 billion people, and that's a pretty big group to lump together as one racial group. And so, it hides the fact that it's an extremely diverse group, and not every Asian American actually has those advantages. The other issue, of course, with the model minority myth is it's a product not necessarily of us working hard, but a product of immigration patterns. So most Asian American immigration happened after the Immigration Act of 1965. Prior to that, of course, there were specific bans on Asian Americans. The Chinese Exclusion Act, Immigration Act of 1915. No, it's later. I apologize. I can't remember the exact year. But that specifically banned immigration from Asia. The new wave of immigrants, and this is part of the wave that I'm part of, was very, very restrictive. So Asian Americans who were wealthy enough and educated enough were allowed to immigrate. And so we already had a significant advantage moving here. My parents were both college educated. We were relatively wealthy. Of course I had advantages. Of course that's going to give me an advantage in the educational workforce. That's not, but that mythology, but that doesn't really fit in with this model minority myth about working hard and so on. So that people seem to forget that, and somehow there are people who actually think that it's somehow hard work and cultural superiority that allowed us to be successful, when in fact it was really selective immigration policies. So that's kind of the model minority myth. And the model minority myth, the problem with it is, number one, is that it does pit Asian Americans against other peoples of color. So, people talk about how, hey, look, see them, they immigrated here, they're people of color, but they work hard and they're succeeding. And so it's used oftentimes as a wedge issue against other peoples of color. And you see that, for example, coming out during the O.J. Simpson riots, the LA riots, right? When Korean Americans were pitted against African Americans. There's a lot of tensions between a lot of Asian American groups and African American groups. Part of it is due to this model minority myth, pitting peoples of color against each other. The other problem with this is that it is oppressive towards, Asian American groups. We seem to think, oh, that's an advantage for us. People think we're smart. But at the same time, it really kind of, I think Kathleen actually mentioned that it kind of pigeonholes us. For example, people say, oh, Asian Americans aren't a, and this is something that I had to deal with. I've been told that, oh, Asian Americans aren't a minority in higher ed because you're overrepresented. That's true to an extent. We're overrepresented in the assistant professor levels, but once you get into tenured levels and also administration, we're underrepresented. And that's because, again, this stereotype that we are technically good, like we're great engineers and technicians, but we're bad at leadership. We're not leaders, which is, of course, ridiculous because, plenty of great leadership going on in Asia right now. But that's kind of this unconscious bias. So it does kind of hide that myth. Also, it does, again, we forget that there are Asian American groups that don't have those structural advantages. For example, there are groups, for example, later immigration patterns later on, a lot of refugees came. So, for example, Hmong Americans or Laotian Americans, they came under very different circumstances. I flew here in 747, we're very wealthy. I had a place to live. If you came in as a refugee, it's a very different experience. And so they don't have some of those advantages and they are struggling with poverty and lack of education, lack of opportunities. And we see the model minority myth, because it lumps all Asians as successful, we forget that.
There's one thing that I want to add to, and Han, I think that, you mentioned this in terms of the ways in which groups are pitted each other, but when the term emerged, we're also coming out of a social political context in where you have civil rights movements, the Chicano movement, right? You have the Indian tribal movement, you have all these ethnic groups who are moving to create some type of social equity and change. And here you have, as Han is saying, you have this group like, why can't you be more like this group who's already been deemed and pathologized to be successful, this particular type of person, right? So, I think we see that also coming out of pushback from social movements for justice for other particular groups. Another thing I also want to add that you're mentioning is that, we're not putting an emphasis on the myth word of this, right? And so even as a myth, it's constructed as this, with positive tenets, right? Like, you work hard, you're smart, you're wealthy, but that actually also is the root of bias and hate crimes of other people, right? How many times have we heard of Asian students in classroom being picked out because they're like, well, you're the smart one, you should do all this, right? And so even in positive connotations, the hate crime that it births, right, is problematic, and as any other type of harassment or hate crime that we also know. But then thinking about the pressure that even that myth creates on students or people themselves, right? Because there's this pressure to perform this particular thing, like I'm going to be the smart one, I get the grades, right? So I think that we can contextualize this from different levels, and as a myth, as positive as it may sound, it's complicating the ways in which people experience our education system and how they experience, solidarity in their communities or solidarity with other groups.
Yeah, I was called a curve buster many times. I'd enter a class and they'd be like, oh my God, he's gonna bust the curve. So yeah, there are those negatives there. There's no such thing as a positive stereotype. And the pressures, I think Dan mentions, if you look at the suicide rates among Asian American students, it's incredibly high because of those pressures. And then of course the pressure of representation that every one of us represents all Asian Americans. Again, back to this idea that we're all kind of this homogenous group. That's an incredible amount of pressure for all peoples of color.
Thank you, everyone. Next question is, what should Asians do when confronted with anti-Asian bias?
I know that's a question for bystander intervention, but I'm going to wait, and we'll wait. We'll get to that in a second. If anyone wants to, share some knowledge first, and then we can go into some specific skills that we can borrow from, the women who've been leading the work on gender-based harassment. So,
Well, I've, as a person who frequently faces a lot of harassment, unfortunately, I just ignore it. The only time I would confront it is when my personal physical safety could be an issue. That's the only time when I would confront it. But in general, I say just the way I found that it's the most useful, put in your headphones, pretend you have a call, just walk on, just walk away. If your personal safety does become of something, just have 911 speed dial. But I've only used it once, but yeah.
Well, I deal with it very differently now than I did when I was younger. I might have had an issue with toxic masculinity when I was young. And that's not, of course, that's never a solution. But growing up, yeah, I got into a few fistfights, but that's not a healthy way to approach it. I mean, I think Jonathan is correct. It depends on the context, depending on the issue. If it's something that's more kind of a more of a microaggression, then that's very different than if it was full-on aggression where they're purposely being racist. So personal safety, I think, is always paramount. If it is a situation where your safety is imperiled, then that's very different than if someone just, casually mentions, hey, you're Asian, you're good at math, right? So in that situation, of course, you talk to them, and why do you think that? And not in a non-confidential way, you can actually talk to that. Although, as a person of color, you don't feel that you should have to do that, because it's freaking tiresome as hell after a while. Explain that every freaking time. It's tiring. So you don't feel like, as a person of color, you have to confront everybody. And this is, I mean, some people said, why didn't you talk to them about that? Why didn't you, it's like, why didn't you do this? Because I don't have time, I'm tired. So don't feel obligated that you have to give a history of Asian American racism to every person who says, oh, hey, you speak such good English. But, so I'm very selective. So if the opportunity opens up, and it could be, I'm an educator, that's what I do. I'll talk to them about it. And oftentimes, if it's non-confrontational and they understand how this is hurtful, then it can be very, very productive. Okay. But again, if it's a safety issue, absolutely. You've got to be aware of safety issues, that there are a lot of people there that are they're trying to get a response from you. In those situations, it might be just best to walk away. And that's when bystander intervention would be helpful. Remember, it's not our job to educate all white people about race issues. It's white people's job to educate themselves.
So then I'll speak to it from the ally community component of it, because I think, like being the person who is victimized and then responding to that, even sometimes when you're the most versed person on microaggressions or systems of injustice, right? When you're experiencing it, it can still be so disarming. You're like, I actually couldn't say anything. Like I couldn't remember anything because I'm still in shock that once again, this happened, right? But if you are a person who's victimized in that way, I would say that holding on to your community, finding your people, and being able to process and talk about those things is extremely needed, and it's healthy. And so if that's happening to you, let someone you care about, let them know, or if it's happening on campus, let an administrator or a professor know, so that we can then be the ones who intervene or whatnot, right? So, but speaking at this from the bystander or the upstander component of this, right? So they call them the 4 Ds of intervention, right? And they're going to move in and out. You're going to be able to use them depending on the context, right? So you can do a direct approach where you tell the person who's the perpetrator that what they're doing is not okay. I think people tend to want to directly go to the person who is being victimized, but we have to tell the perpetrators that what they're doing is not okay, because that's what changes, hopefully, the behavior and establishes the type of norm that we want to uphold. The other D is a distract, right? I think we're all pretty good maybe at like changing those awkward conversations when they're coming, right? And we're like, hey, so let's talk about your chickens instead of, you know, what that racist joke that I see you're going to be doing, right? Have you heard that person when they're going to tell a racist joke, they usually go like this? They check the sides and then you're like, no, stop it. Let's talk about my chickens again, right? So you can do a distraction approach. Or another skill that we have is a delegate. When we see harassment happening and we feel that our safety is compromised or that we just don't know how to do it, we can always rely on other people so that they can help us in the intervention, right? So check in with the people who are being harassed or other people who are not being harassed. And then the delayed response. The reality is that we're not always going to be really equipped to do something because sometimes it's just that shitty or traumatizing or hurtful, but we can always check in with the people who are being hurt after the fact, right? And hopefully that goes somewhere. But I also want to point out that we can do this online as well. I think that people are taking vast liberties to make shitty comments on whatever post or not or whatnot, right? So I think I'm not saying feed the trolls, don't engage in every single conversation. But the more that someone can say, give that angry emoji or say like, that's shitty, you don't say that, and I'm gonna put a link in an article about how to be a better person, right? I think that's enough. But people are paying attention when people make shitty comments online. People are paying attention to how many people are liking them and how many people are saying this is not okay, right? And I'm hoping that through a social norming component of this, the more that we tell the online trolls that what they're saying is not okay, if they're real people, if they're from Russia, I don't know how to fix those bots. But, you know, like that, the more that we say, this is shitty, you can't do that, hopefully the message carries through that people care. And if it's not them, it's probably the other individual who are also scrolling through that particular feed. So I really think that we have a responsibility to make a comment and engage cyberbullying or anti-Asian bias when we see it online. Other people are going to see that shit. They need to see that not everybody is on page and that that's not okay.
One other comment. And this refers back to the model minority myth. I think there's this perception that there's no racism against Asian Americans, and for a variety of reasons I've been told this. Because, again, model minority myth, we're successful, therefore there's no racism, because discrimination against Asians is completely erased from the history books, so there's a perception that there's no racism. So oftentimes a lot of Asian Americans will experience racism and they will internalize it rather than say, hey, that was racist, that was not me, that's on them. I think it's really important to recognize that we are the victims of racism and recognize it for that and call it out. And the worst thing you can do is actually just internalize it. And there's a lot of that, unfortunately, within the Asian American community, mainly because, again, there's this idea that, hey, maybe I'm just being a whiner because Asians weren't enslaved, Asians didn't experience this, that, or the other. When in fact, I mean, there's a rich history of Asian American discrimination in the US. And so it does happen. It is not appropriate. It is not you. You know, it's just, we just need to call it out, I think, as a community. And oftentimes we haven't done a good job of that because it fights against that, again, that model minority.
Thank you, everyone. I really want to echo what Han and Jonathan said about the burden of confronting and stopping racism cannot fall on those impacted by it, right? This is an opportunity for us as a Westminster community to stand in solidarity and put privilege on the line. So with that in mind, Dan, I know that you talked about bystander intervention. I'm wondering if there are any other ways we can encourage and try to eliminate any anti-Asian bias on our campus. If anyone has thoughts on that.
So if they're happening on campus, I think that the more that we document this and report this, right? Like there's two parts of it. One, there's the database that we're building of these cases happening, right? So if at Westminster, you're seeing that someone is saying something racist, problematic, or any type of harassment that is questionable, when in doubt, just report. So I really would encourage people to use the BERT process, right? And you can find it in our website, and then just document like, hey, I'm seeing some of these things, because then we're starting to keep a log of those pieces, right? But I think the other end of it, so that we're not just being reactive whenever we're seeing, you know, these types of bias, but we also got to be celebrating communities and naming their importance to how they contribute to the fabric of Westminster, right? So we can target anti-Asian bias by celebrating the ways in which those communities contribute to our campus, and we can do that all year round, right?
One of the things I faced in the past, this isn't really at Westminster. So this was back when I was a cadet with the Air Force. I had this cadet who was an upperclassman, so he was technically in charge of me. He had a tendency to single out the Asian cadets. There were only two of us, and doing inspections, and we would just get chewed up on the smallest blemishes on our shoes that were supposed to be polished, while the cadet standing next to us, their entire lower half is caked in mud. They would get away with it, and we would get rid up during inspections. So I've experienced it, not really at Westminster, but mostly at the University of Utah. But the cadet was corrected through the correct channels. But mainly at Westminster, what I've seen is, for me, was, I don't know if you can consider it racism, but more actions against me from students coming in directly from the People's Republic of China, but it's more on the lines of ideology. And once they find out that I was a cadet or I lived in Beijing for a couple of years, they would chew me up for it. But that's the most I've experienced at Westminster.
By the way, I think for a lot of Asian Americans, that's an ongoing issue as well. Because again, back to this idea that we're perpetual foreigners, a lot of us feel like that we're constantly told that we're Korean or Chinese or Japanese or Vietnamese, etc. At the same time, we don't quite belong in those communities as well, because some of us have been here for generations. Others moved here when we were quite young, and so we don't fit quite well in here. So a lot of Asian Americans feel like we're kind of in this weird gray area where we have no home. So I think that's an important point. And also the experience, we have to be careful not to conflate the experience of Asian Americans with Asians, because those are very, very different experiences. And a lot of times those two experiences are conflated, and that's frustrating for me, because if you have, for example, a Chinese scholar who's here on a visiting professorship, his experience is going to be very, very, very different than my experience. I grew up as an American here, and I'm a professor, but we happen to look the same. We're both Asian, and therefore people think that the issues that concern us are the same. So thanks for that, Jonathan.
Yes, that's a really, I think that's a really important point, to not conflate the experiences, but I think the response to acknowledging that their community members could also be the same. And I need to be clarified something what I said about the bias response process team. It's not just a log where we're keeping a record of people being harassed. There's actually action items that come out of it, right? There are the people who are identified as perpetrators or individuals who are, responsible for microaggressions. They are brought in, and it's an educational intervention. And so it's not just a log. It's actually tough stuff comes out of it.
Cool.
Just to continue on what we can do in Westminster, I think one of the things we can do, fortunately, it's kind of interesting. We are underrepresented. within the Westminster College community. I mean, it's Dan knows my frustration for years that we've been trying to get more, more of an Asian American identity on campus. But I think identifying and recognizing that we are Asian American and celebrating the fact that our own unique culture, I think, is really, really important. I think, especially for Asian Americans, this idea of perpetual outsider, that's had such really, really negative effects on our community. One of those things is we've tried so hard to be American and to forget this kind of idea that, of course, we're never going to escape that because we just look different, but we've always tried to be more American. I remember being teased about my Korean food. I would bring Korean food lunch and I would get teased incessantly to the point that, and I see a lot of head nodding. It's like, I got to eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. I'm sorry, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are goddamn gross, okay? I'm sorry. I'd much rather have kimchi and rice. But because of this pressure to be American, we've kind of lost our identity. I think we need to reclaim that. Luckily, there's more acceptance now. Korean American cuisine and K-pop is huge, and that's just weird to me. It's like, wow, this is crap I used to get teased about. Now everybody wants my kimchi recipe. But I think it's something that's important that we need to, to reclaim our unique, and we have a very Asian American culture too. I think that's important to recognize that my Korean American culture is very different than Korean culture. It's in some ways very unrelated, and that's okay. And so I think we need to recognize that and celebrate that instead of trying to be honorary white people. We need to embrace the fact that we're Asian Americans, so be more present, talk about it. And I think that's a big part of it. When people recognize that, man, we're Asian Americans, we need to start embracing, we as a community need to start kind of embracing the fact that we are Asian Americans and our culture is something that is amazing and we should celebrate it instead of trying to be white.
Which is why I'm so excited for AP Live. Y'all have been doing so many great things. So finally we got your group and y'all are kicking butt. You all though, right? Because I think that celebration really is a celebration where y'all get together and you can just exist, right? Like we know about the great things that y'all do as an API board because Annie tells us, but at the end of the day, it's not for, the entertainment of other, as Han to say, whether it's white folks or brown folks, like this is for you, for your empowerment. And that's why I'm really excited that you are all created on our campus. Thank you.
Thank you all for those answers. V, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you're on the panel, and so I wanted to give this space in case you had any thoughts on any of what we've been talking about. Feel free to chime in.
Okay. So I personally never experienced such harsh thing like Jonathan before because I am living here for 3 years. But I actually want to talk a little bit about how you can deal with, or maybe deal with anti-Asian bias, because I'm personally I don't know but when I was working for the tax clinic, people look at me well, you look smart, that's why I'm gonna trust you with my tax. But I take it's not very serious. I'd be yeah, that's good, I'm smart, then just go ahead and take a seat and then I'll help you out. And then I feel if you look at things more okay, if people say you're good at math, or yeah, you seem smart, then just take it. Feel that's good. But other thing, when my aunt, she went to the market because her English is not that good, so she got the look from the cashier. And I noticed that is not actually the big thing, but I noticed people have some problem with people who don't actually speak English and who are Asian Americans, but their English is not that good. So I feel I don't know, I'm just very excited to be here and talk to you guys about this. And then you guys have a lot of insights about how to deal with this. And thank you guys.
Thank you. I want to emphasize what you're saying in terms of the look. If you're a person who's experienced discrimination, you know what we mean, or when you say the look, that just hits into a whole folder of experiences. And then when people who haven't experienced that because of whatever privilege or whatnot, they won't understand that those are moments on moments on moments, right? That what if it's just in isolation, yeah, it's insignificant if someone is just giving you a look like you're an outsider, you're a foreigner, or like, I can't believe you're even talking to me, right? But when those accumulate and they continue to happen, it becomes exhausting, right? So even one small look, that it could even be like, I didn't like your Harry Potter cloak that you're wearing, but I'm already thinking that you're thinking the worst of me, right? And I think that's important to recognize as allies, as people who are trying to build solidarity across peoples, across movements. If someone says, my tia or my aunt or my grandma went to the market and she got the look right, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and validate that the impact of that is real, even if it sounds just as insignificant as a look.
Yeah.
These microaggressions can have serious long-term, as Dan said, they have long-term impact. I grew up with these. You know, I grew up in Massachusetts, just kind of internalizing every time someone said, yeah, you speak such good English. Like, well, you don't, but that's okay. I think I've had one person say, oh, you speak English so well. Everybody says you speak good English, which is, I find it very ironic. But anyways, yeah, it gets tiresome after a long time. And then you start questioning yourself, like, oh, maybe I need to just lighten up. And that's reinforced by, again, the mono-minority myth, and people say, well, that's not a big deal, huh? That's not racism. Racism is African Americans getting lynched. That's racism. No, racism comes in all shapes, sizes, and forms, okay? So don't let people, if you feel like, a lot of times we'll get a microaggression, you're like, oh boy, that felt bad, but maybe I should just suck it up. No, that's still racism, and you don't have to put up with that. Okay, so remember, and this was why I said, made my point about a lot of us in the Asian American community, because of the mono-minority myth and this idea that racism against us don't exist. Also, you know, kind of supported by the stereotypes of us being passive and quiet. We don't want to make waves. We internalize that, and we kind of, for the longest time, we never did anything about it. And now I think we as a community need to come up and really speak out and you know, mobilize, especially right now.
Thank you, everyone. Dan, you mentioned the bias response team, or BERT. Can you say a little bit more about if someone does experience a microaggression, how to file a report?
Right. So when you can go to, if you go to our website, and if you can just type in bias report, it will put up on the search, because they moved it and I don't know exactly where it's at, but it's in the website. So just go to the search and put in bias report, and then you can go ahead and put it there. So let me also, I mean, I can just go and look and tell you exactly. I do have, you know, the ability to tell you exactly where it's located. Response for BERT in the search, you will find that at the bottom, bias reporting and administrative services if you're a staff. And if you're a current student, you can also find it under...
It's under resources.
Thank you, under resources. So you're looking for bias reporting, and then you can submit it. You can submit it as anonymously. You can submit it with your name. So when in doubt, just report it.
Thank you, Dan. So we have about 7 minutes left, and the panel wanted to reserve some time for any questions from, it can either be from our audience members, you can type them in the chat, or we're a small enough group, you can ask them if you want. So I will open that up to questions from anyone.
Questions or comments too, so.
I have a question. Oh, sorry. You go ahead.
Go first with your question.
Sorry. So I'm actually a member of AAPI, and we're actually looking for more members. And I just wonder, like, how can we look for a list of Asians, or like people interested in Asian culture on campus?
So we don't have a list.
Okay.
But I think Carrie's been working with Annie to try to figure out at least the students who self-disclose when they admit. We can't give you like folks the list, but we can reach out to them as part of the center. So so we can do that part. But I think that I love that you are. I've been at this job for 3.5 years, and Han knows we've been trying to get a group going since as long as I've been here, and you actually got it going. You've been connected, you've had a solid connection, and I really want to emphasize that even whether it's you four, and I think Annie said that there's more people on the board, that's mighty right now, because being able to have consistency and knowing each other and building relationships, that's going to be your biggest recruitment tool, so that when you see other individuals on campus that you get to know and you can invite them to be part of this group, you've already created that type of community, right? And so the reason why I want to emphasize is that yes, we can put out more, do more outreach, put more advertisement, but I wouldn't want I wouldn't want that to say that we just need more participants so that we can see how it's working. It is working. You are there, you're consistent, you created a board. We hear about all the great things you are doing, right? And so just communicating that to people, and then it's like, hey, you can come and be part of this group. I think that also is powerful.
Yeah.
I don't know if that made any sense, but there you go.
It makes sense. Thank you.
So I don't have a question, because you guys have done such a great job of throughout the panel, but I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for putting this panel on and letting me participate. As a new member of the Westminster community, I am learning and trying to understand how best I can be an ally to you all. And so thank you. Thank you for letting me have this opportunity to learn.
Thanks for being here. That's important. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. I also want to give a shout out to someone who is not here but was integral in helping setting this up. That is Annie Nguyen. She runs the Asian American Pacific Islander Life Program. So thank you, Annie, out there. And thank you to everyone who participated in this. This has been really incredible for the center. Thank you all. Are there any last things that you want to leave us with? Anyone have any final comments?
I think I'm really glad that we have this program going on. Just like Han said, like we're just put into this like big homogenous group, and what I like about the program is that we all come from many different backgrounds and different perspectives, and it just really breaks us apart from being just like one whole big group. Yeah, and that's just what I really like about the group. It's just interesting to learn how like everyone's journey along the way. We had on our first open, or I guess like program opening, or I'm not sure what it's called. We had a panel, and it was very interesting to hear everyone's journey of just like first generation or immigrants, and it was really inspiring. I mean, some of them came from like, one of them came from New York, and like I can't remember what neighborhood, the Bronx, I think. And it was like really interesting, like because that kind of resonated with me, because I came from like a neighborhood that isn't, it's like a low income, or like a neighborhood in poverty. It's just like a neighborhood around here, like Rose Park. And I don't know, it just I'm really glad to hear that like someone else has like similar experiences to me, and just to hear like everyone else's experiences.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you to all of you so much for joining in on this panel. If I'll say this, and also for the recording, for anyone watching later, if you would like to join the AAPI Life listserv, then please contact Annie Nguyen. You can find her in the Westminster directory on your Outlook. Or also on the website. If you go to the Student Diversity and Inclusion Center, you can find more information about that program. Dan, is there any last words you want to leave us with?
No, just thank you for being here. Thanks for showing up for the group that you're doing. And I mean, just let's carry forward and continue to support and validate each other as a community, and, you know, celebrating our similarities and differences. I think that's what makes us great.
Yes, to all of that. Thank you all. Have a really great rest of your Thursday.
Bye. Also, Han, you may be on fire, but I'm going to Hogwarts. Ouch. All right.
Yay.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.